everyone. Welcome to episode 323 of the At Percussion podcast. My name is Ben Charles, and with me, as always, is my co-host Karli Viña.
Hey, Ben. How's it
Hey,
going?
Karli. It's going well. I'm in Corpus Christi with Ksenia right now.
I know. Actually, you're having a big weekend because you just had that Christopher Dean memorial concert too. How was that?
It was wonderful. So, yeah, we had a concert in Denton 2 days ago, as of the time of this recording, to celebrate the music of Christopher Dean. It was the most packed I've ever seen the hall. I got to play his marimba quartet, Vespertine formations. There were all sorts of his works being performed, and there were a couple speakers. His wife and his sister both spoke. So it was a lovely event, and it was recorded, and there will be some, I don't know, full recordings or just snippets of it, but some sort of recordings of that event will come out. And unfortunately, we're recording this at sort of an odd time, so you're stuck with just Karli and me today, no other co-hosts. So, but if you're listening to this episode on release day, it's going to be released on April 7th. Karli, what happened in history on April 7th?
Yeah, April 7th, a couple of birthdays. April 7th, 1915 was Billie Holiday's birthday, and I didn't know that her birth name was actually Eleanora Fagan. She was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1917, jazz percussionist Mongo Santamaria, who was known for composing the jazz standard Afro Blue, was born in Cuba. In 1938, rock drummer Spencer Dryden of Jefferson Airplane and New Riders of the Purple Sage was born in New York City. But the big thing we're going to talk about today was that in 1805, Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, was premiered in Vienna. So our listeners probably know that Beethoven's Third Symphony was really monumental at the time, especially for extending both the length of the symphony and the size of the orchestra. And here's a little background on the piece. He originally titled the piece Bonaparte because he greatly admired Napoleon at the time. But then when Napoleon declared himself emperor in 1804, Beethoven decided, maybe I'm not so into that anymore. So he named the piece Eroica. And it was dedicated at that time to Prince Franz Joseph von Lobkowitz, who was his patron. And it was at Lobkowitz's palace that the Eroica was first performed. Let's see, the reception was really mixed. Like a lot of these kind of groundbreaking pieces, there was a group of Beethoven's close friends who said from the beginning that the symphony is a masterpiece and that if the public didn't like it, that was only because they were not educated enough to be able to appreciate it. But they said at this time it would have a lasting impact on the art form of the symphony. And some other critics did not appreciate the work initially. A lot of people denied the symphony's artistic value and were dismayed. This is a direct quote: "By the endless duration of this longest and perhaps most difficult of all symphonies, which exhausts even connoisseurs and becomes unbearable for the mere amateur." So of course, we know now that the first group was right because it has definitely stood the test of time for 2 centuries, at least so far. So Beethoven was known for really expanding the symphony. Here are a couple of his biggest innovations. In Beethoven 3, he had 3 horns instead of 2. It was also the longest symphony, and up until that point, it was nearly an hour, I should say. Beethoven 5 was the first use of trombones in a symphony. Beethoven 9, we probably all know, was the first to use choir. And of course, the percussion, it wasn't the first time percussion was used, but it is still pretty noteworthy and fun to play. So in our new history segment, fashion inspired by Ben's segment, Bach or Nacht, last week, we have a little quiz game. This week's segment is called Beethoven or Nay-toven. So in this segment, we'll have a couple of facts, and it is Ben and our special guest Shannon's job to say whether this is true or not about Beethoven. So here's the first one. Beethoven was actually Ludwig van Beethoven III. His grandfather was also a musician in Bonn, Germany, and he was the original Ludwig van Beethoven. Beethoven or Nay-toven?
I'm going to say Beethoven.
I will say Beethoven.
That one is true. That was like a softball warm-up. So here's another one. Here's number 2. He only turned to composing after he hurt his finger using a homemade device intended to prop up his fingers while practicing. He was so eager to succeed that he thought this crude instrument would help him get there faster. Instead, he ended up permanently injuring his 2 fingers on his right hand, immediately ending his ambition as a pianist.
I'm going to say Nay-toven because I think I remember hearing that's like Schumann, maybe. It was another composer, I think.
Exactly. You're
It
right.
was definitely Schumann.
Oh my God, look at me.
I can't stump you guys. Okay, maybe this next one. Beethoven was the first musician in recorded Western history to receive a salary with no duties other than to compose, however and whenever he wanted to.
I'll say true.
I'm not sure, but I'll say true.
That one's true. Wow, 3 for 3. I gotta come up with harder ones next time.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the next one. He had unusual taste in house animals. At different points in his life, he kept a canary, a starling, a dog, and a horse.
I have no idea, but it sounds possible, so I'll say true.
I'm gonna say I'll say false. NATO.
Shannon's right. That was actually Ben Mozart. Mozart had a horse. And
Oh, they said Ben is right. I
animals.
got excited. Shannon's right. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, composers are weird, so they have probably all have horses and pigs and stuff.
I think he was too obsessed with his piano to care about a pet.
Right. Right. Well, I was reading all these facts about Beethoven, and it turns out he wasn't a very good housekeeper. Like he was
Yeah,
known
it's kind
for
of
having
messy.
like food scraps and just everything was a mess. I
Yeah.
don't imagine him taking care of a horse.
Right.
So 2 more. Once Beethoven attempted to break a chair over the head of Prince Lichnowsky, who was one of his closest friends and most loyal patrons.
That's got to be true. 100%.
I would say true.
That one is true. Yeah. Apparently he had a temper.
Mhm.
Okay, one more. This is your chance to tie it up, Ben. Beethoven played the piano in the dark throughout his entire life. He would always put out the candles in the room, and even when playing at an event or a party, he would ask to extinguish the light in the room.
It sounds like I think of Beethoven as angry, not weird. That seems like someone else.
Yeah. I've never heard that, so I would say false.
So that one, okay, it is false. Any guess on who it actually was?
Grieg, I don't know.
Chopin.
Chopin. Wow.
Yeah.
What was that? 6 for 6.
Wow.
Yeah, Grieg
All
was
right.
the one with the frog figurine, right? That was the fact from last
Yeah,
week.
that was Grieg. I think it was the frog figurine in his pocket. Well, that was awesome, Karli. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah,
And I was
thank
going to
you.
mention, if you're interested, MTT has a great video in his Keeping Score series on Beethoven 3. And I looked, it's on YouTube. It's almost 2 hours long, but wonderful resource. And Beethoven 3 is one of the few symphonies that I've gotten to perform timpani in the orchestra. So
Excellent.
yeah. Well, our guest today is a notable Beethoven trivia expert,
Unknowingly.
as well as the owner of MalletShop.com and the principal timpanist of the St. Louis Symphony. So please welcome to the podcast, Shannon Wood.
Great to be here.
So great to have you. And I think Karli and I actually first met you sometime around 2012 or so when you stopped by Miami to give a clinic. So it's good
That's
to see
right.
you, I guess, about 10 years later.
Yes.
Time flies.
Yes.
But Shannon, I initially wanted to have you on because of this MalletShop.com that you run. I have to say that I have this desire to get a Deegan artist special xylophone. And so I go online and I browse, and it's like a teenager hiding magazines that he shouldn't have to have under his bed. I am just like on
Yeah.
Mallet Shop looking at all these beautiful vintage instruments. So Shannon, can you tell us about MalletShop.com? Where did the idea come from? How'd you get started? And what have
Sure.
been some of the challenges?
Sure. First, I'll let you know that I have 4 artist specials in-house right now. Three 3.5 octaves. That's 262, and one 264, which is the 4-octave version. So
Very nice. Yeah, I'm
I can help
interested
your
in
wish
the
come true.
I'm interested in the 264, and I actually right now I have a lead on one that I think that's the one I'm going to pursue. But I would definitely let you know if that doesn't work out.
Nice. So, so when you're in school, you're spoiled if you're at a university that just has such an abundance of equipment. And so I was in that position at University of Michigan and also Temple. We had just equipment at our disposal. And following grad school, I was a year in Charleston and then went to New World. And of course, New World Symphony, a fellowship program, had tons of equipment. Upon leaving there, I went to a per service job with the Naples Philharmonic, and I had no equipment. And that was kind of the advent of the internet for me. It was the late 90s. That's when people were just kind of getting their desktop and starting to get online, AOL. And that's what I did. And I found these classifieds online and came across some instruments for sale. And I had no intent of starting a business. My only intent was to get some instruments so I could practice. And so I ended up purchasing a few. I did some of the basic restoration work, sent the bars to Gilberto up at Century, and I did a lot of the kind of refinishing out of my garage down in Florida at the time. And then I posted them for sale, and I had like a members.aol FTP server. It was the very first rendition of a website, if you will, but it was really just a list. And the idea was to sell those items and then use the profit to fund the instruments I wanted to keep. And that was my only plan. And it just kind of turned into what it is by people contacting me and saying, hey, if you come across this, could you let me know? Or I'm looking for this, or I have this, if you're interested in buying this. And it just kind of blossomed and enveloped into what it is. It was really no intent. It's kind of just one of those ideas that serves a purpose and then turns into something. And that's the beginning story of Mallet Shop. Pretty simple.
Cool. So with all these great products available today from a number of wonderful companies, why might someone be interested in purchasing a vintage instrument?
Well, the vintage instruments have rosewood that is just incomparable to anything on the market. The Hunter and rosewood, they're 1,000-year-old trees that were harvested, and then they were preserved, kiln dried, cut into bars, and they've that's 100 years of age. And the bars they just sound so amazing. And when you compare that with newer instruments, a lot of the newer rosewood is softer, it's harvested at a younger age, and it can splinter and dent a lot easier. I know Ron Samuels with Marimba One has come up with a technique that hardens. I think it's compressing the wood so that it's very dense. So that would be the closest wood to something that's comparable. But aside from that rosewood, personally, I love, like, an old car has all the chrome instead of vulcanized or formed plastic bumpers and things like that. And when you look at the old Deacon and the Leading instruments, there's so much nickel plating and chrome that just is so beautiful to me. And I think that's an aspect, just like an old vintage car, that is beautiful, and these old instruments have that. So I think that's the reason why a lot of people still seek these out. Mallet Shop sells all over the world. I've got a huge European customer base, orchestras and music studios and schools and a lot of professionals. And it's hard to find these instruments, and there aren't a lot of places that you can find them where they've been preserved. You can see on Facebook there's a lot of trade and swapping going on like that, but preserving the instruments takes a lot of definitive techniques and retuning and replating and just doing it proper so that these instruments can last another 100 years.
Yeah, it's funny actually, when I was thinking about this, like the car analogy is the exact same thing I came up with. And it's like, Yeah, like a brand new, Corvette that can go 200 miles per hour or something is cool, but what's also cool is like a 1967 Stingray or something. It's just
Exactly.
such a cool thing to have. And yeah, I remember hearing about like rosewood. For anyone that's not familiar, rosewood cannot be farmed. It has to grow
Hmm.
naturally and be harvested. And from what I've heard is that all the good rosewood trees are gone. And so when you cut
Hmm.
down a rosewood tree now, there's rot in the middle, and you're basically cutting out the inside of the tree and finding bits of usable wood.
Hmm.
Um, well, one of the most interesting parts of Mallet Shop seems to be the Gigster that you've developed.
Hmm.
So, for those that are unfamiliar, could you tell us what this instrument is and how it was developed, and maybe some of the interesting use case scenarios you've seen for it?
Sure. So Gigster is a 2.6 octave vibraphone in a suitcase. And the idea of that came about when I came across this Italian instrument in a suitcase called vibrafonette, which is vibraphone but miniature version. Um, and it was made by a company called Galanti. They also made like accordions, guitars, a number of different instruments. This would have been back in the mid 1900s, so kind of mid-century modern. And the design of that instrument is very mid-century modern. Whenever I would get one, they would sell very quick. And I just fell in love. I'm not a vibraphonist by any means. I can, you know, doodle on one, but I'm not a jazz vibist at all. But I just fell in love with the design. I fell in love with the instrument, and there were a lot of problems with the instrument. The bars are not the greatest quality. The range was very narrow. There were 2 octaves. You can find a 2.5, but they're harder to find. But they're still kind of bulky and heavy, and they just have a handle. There's not a variable speed motor, and it just wasn't. I looked at that and thought, wow, it'd be really cool to redesign this someday. And so I remember drawing out sketches and kind of looking into what would it take to produce this. And that kind of R&D is really excruciating. I actually, probably 6 or 7 years plus went by before I actually said, okay, I'm going to do it. And when that day did come, it was kind of doing what I had done the research early on, but now is just a little bit more adamant about it. And every phone call, every inquiry, different machine shops, different material companies led to another person. A door would shut, or I'd find out it's just too pricey, and then it led to a different contact. Suddenly, the day came, enough of the right doors open where I thought, wow, I think I can actually do this and make it somewhat profitable, or at least get it done and not have it be a crazy expensive instrument. And so I had my first prototype done right before the pandemic, and the idea was to go to PASIC, and so we went to PASIC. Premiered the first one. This would have been in 2019, November 2019, and had a booth. A number of makers came by, looked at it. Franz from Adams, and he looked at it and said, "Wow, this is a really clever instrument." Damaro came over and was really positive about it. Said he actually said, "This is the best sounding instrument with a K&K system I've heard." Like, how are you making your bars? What did you do? And so I had a lot of good feedback. A lot of people at PASIC and attendees were interested in it. And so I didn't know, how is it going to be received, because it's not a traditional C or F to F3 octave. And the story behind that is that it was meant really for smaller indie bands or coffee shop bands or bands that or even jazz vibists who didn't necessarily need a 3 octave but just wanted a solo range, and they would work with the pianist or guitarist who would comp, so they didn't necessarily need to comp while they're soloing. So since we've had pretty good sales, the pandemic and the supply chain has caused costs to go up, and so we've had to restructure pricing. But we're in the process of seeing if we can bring the cost down by altering the construction of the case, and also seeing if we can come up with a 3-octave, because there is a certain percentage of people who will only play a 3-octave, and that's probably been the downside news of it, is that it's not necessarily for everybody. But it's exciting. It was the first time I've manufactured something, and it's exciting, but also like pull your hair out, because there's so many things that like didn't work along the way, and we had to redesign and remachine, and I learned a lot.
Well, I just wanted to say, I remember seeing it at your booth it must have been PASIC 2019. And it looks super cool, and it sounds good too. I remember like played a couple notes and like, whoa, like it's surprisingly great sounding for that portability.
Thank you. Yeah, I think some of the things that make it sound so good is that the bars are very thick. They're modeled after an older Deegan W300 or the 300W. I can't remember, but it's an older vibe. They're a mirror polished finish, and when you mirror polish, it kind of hardens the aluminum a bit. And we're using aluminum and processing it similar to how Deegan did. Of course, you can't make it exact because some of the foundries just aren't making the material the same way. And also because it sits in a case, that case is kind of like a string instrument or guitar. It's like a resonating chamber, and the resonators are under there, and so that the air and the sound is getting amplified to a degree by that case, and that sounds terrific. It's got a lot of volume, and the K&K system, of course, is a add-on accessory that allows you to amplify or to run it through effects and adds much more volume.
Yeah, it's super cool. Congratulations on that.
Thanks. One little thing I'll add to that is that we added a handle, just like luggage. So it's a pull-out handle and wheels. So unlike the Galanti or the Deegan Electrovibe or the Deegan 147, which are all portable kind of in-case vibraphones, this one's electric and acoustic, but it has like a pull-out handle and wheels, so you can move it around like luggage.
So you mentioned like there were some surprises and bumps in the road along the way, things you had to change. What were the most interesting surprises, or what caught you off guard in developing this?
So many things. The different materials, what materials are available, the cost in producing some of the parts. For example, the case. The case is made with a CNC machine, so there are a lot of layers that go to it, and they're puzzled together and glued, and having that done in such an exact way so that you've got a dampener bar that pulls down evenly and then dampens all the bars, lining up the resonators at the right height under the bar so that you're still getting, because the resonator amplifies the bar, and if it's not set quite right, that can change even the tune, the pitch, the frequency, and it can make it sound a little bit off. Coming up with the bar dimensions, even though we were kind of modeling it after Deegan, we extended the range, and so making sure that extension range was accurate. And weight was an issue, experimenting with different weights, because we wanted ultimately it to be a lightweight Gigster instrument. And even though the Baltic birch is still 110 pounds, when you're using the handle and the wheels, it leverages that weight, so you don't feel like you're really dealing with 100 pounds, except when you're lifting it up to a car. So there's so many trial and error moments where like things just didn't function right, or something didn't line up, and you're going back and redesigning it and trying to figure out how to make it better and more user-friendly.
I was going to say that we've all at some point encountered a tabletop xylophone, and they don't sound very good. And I have to confess, when I first saw the instrument, I was like, "Oh yeah, I can already picture what it's going to sound like. It's going to be like hollow and all." But then when I looked through the pictures, like the way that you we're able to get resonators in there, and it's like an L bend in the resonators, and it's all like
Yeah.
within the case. I was like, oh, that's cool, like clever. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. It's probably one of the most difficult instruments of the keyboard instruments to start with. A xylophone is pretty simple. A marimba, even though it's larger and more material, you don't have all the moving parts. And with a vibraphone, you've got bars, but then you've got a motor, you've got pulsators, a dampener bar, and all that stuff is challenging to line it up properly.
Well, Shannon, speaking of Mallet Shop stuff, there was an NPR April Fool's joke of they were auctioning off a set of rare Stradivarius timpani. They were expected to fetch 8 figures at
Oh
auction.
yeah, I think
So
I saw that.
yeah,
I remember
so
that.
that got me thinking. I was like poking around your instruments. Right now, you have Demaro 5 1/3 octave marimba, so it's a
Yeah,
low A below regular low A,
yeah,
which you could use for the Levitan marimba quartet. And there's like
right.
the Earl Hatch marimba that's like super weird. So, what have been some of the most interesting, unique instruments you've seen come through Mallet Shop?
Uh, Doug DeMauro made these bass marimbas. They were an octave and a half, and they were made of all wood. The resonators were wood, kind of like the Chiapas instruments that have the buzz character. Those resonators are wood, and I had never seen anything like that. And I think he only made maybe two or four, and I came across one of those. It was very unusual and unique. Of course, when you find like a set of Parsifals, and it's a glockenspiel, and they have resonators, or they're in a case. I've come across some unusual models that you don't see every day, and I came across a 3 octave set of round tops. That's C to C in a case, and I probably only found 2 of those in the past. Of course, some of the old timpani, like Baroque style timpani, Schneller timpani, you don't find those that often. I would say even like a Electrovibe, even though it's from the 70s, you don't see them a lot. Or the 147, which is a pedal vibraphone, a Deacon vibraphone in a little suitcase. That's kind of rare. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff out there, and it's kind of like part of the fun for Mallet Shop is finding it. It's like an Easter egg hunt. I just get so energized when I come across something and you find this, treasure that's still in existence. It's been around for 100 years, and I get excited, not even from a monetary standpoint, but finding this treasure and then knowing that, hopefully I can get it and preserve the legacy of it, get it back on stage. Like that really excites me. The longevity of these instruments and keeping them in the world, because they're beautiful instruments.
So do you find you're mostly like you're scouring the web looking for instruments to restore and sell, or do people come to you with, hey, I have this that needs some TLC? Are you interested?
It started with me doing a lot of scouring the internet, because of course nobody knew about Mallet Shop in the earlier days, and it's slowly progressed to a point where a lot of people contact me now. Social media's changed it a bit, of both positively and maybe negatively. So there's a lot of trading going on between individuals amongst themselves now, whereas before there weren't many places where you could find something, or not many places where you could even get rid of something. So the plus is that it's easier to find things if you want to find things, for anybody, but also for me, through swap shops, classifieds online, reverb.com, eBay, but there's also a lot of movement between hands and not necessarily going through Mallet Shops. So there's a bit of a loss of business too. But I think the upside is that because there's so much of all of it, it's like more than I can handle even as it is right now. So we have tons of instruments in inventory right now that aren't on the site, that are just have yet to get restored or serviced. And a number of times people contact me and they're saying they're looking for something, just as Benjamin mentioned, he's looking for an artist special. A lot of times that, someone will contact me and I'll say, well, I have this, and they'll put a deposit on it and purchase it before it even gets to the site. And that probably happens more often than not. So if somebody's looking for something that's not on the site, it doesn't mean that we don't have it.
Well, I imagine even with everybody now, we're all used to buying things online, and there's the Facebook groups and all that people sell things. Like, there's still a lot of power in your name and knowing the quality of work that you do, and it's not buying something that somebody found in their grandfather's basement or something like that.
It's true. And so I think there's different level of audience members or customers. Some that are just want to find something, they don't need it in top shape, they just want to practice instrument. And so recently I've come up with something it's called OK to Play, and the idea of that is we get it in top mechanical condition but forego all the cosmetic or restoration work so that we can keep the price down, because restoration is just so expensive. And I know you look at an instrument on the site and it's for a 4-octave xylophone, and you're getting up into the 5,000 or 6,000 range. That's a lot of money, but the work involved is just so specific, and the cost of different materials or plating is just very costly. And so, comparatively, though, if you look at like a new 4-octave Damaro or Marimba 1, they're priced at around 8 or 9. So if you think about it, you can still get a Leedy or a Deegan restored in the 6s. It's still less than buying a new 4-octave custom made that is kind of the quote unquote Deegan, replica instrument. So it's still a buy when you look at it that way. But I think there's still kind of an awakening that people are going through when they see something priced so high. So we're trying to offer a market for those who just don't want to spend that kind of money or aren't able to spend that kind of money but still would like an older instrument.
I was going to ask, like, with pricing, I mean, when you're getting something secondhand, there's no set price in terms of like what were the materials that went into it or something like that. And then also, like, if you got two of the let's say two Deegan 262 xylophones, one in mint condition and one that needed a lot of restoration work, like, how do you price those, because they're going to end up on the website at the same time and one's going to cost $3,000 more?
So there are a few factors that come into play. One is what's the condition of the bars, because ultimately that's where the value is. If the bars have been tuned before, or if there's been some wear and splinters and we have to do kind of a resin repair work, that's all depreciating the value of the instrument overall. So I might price an instrument a little bit lower, even though it's been restored, than compared to another. And a viewer may not necessarily know why, but the reason is because the bars on the other set are just premium. They may be virgin bars that have never been tuned, so there's more wood. So after you tune, there's more wood on the bar. Whereas another set may have had 2 tunings, so they're just thinner on the edges, or like the splinter repair work. Also, there are early bars. You will see Nagid written down, and that's Deegan spelled backwards. Those are the like really early bars that Deegan kind of used as a marketing tool to say that they're like the premium aged rosewood. And whether or not that's true, that the even the later rosewood is still spectacular. But I think there's a still kind of this idea that the Nagid bars are just a unique, like a level above, a cut above, and so people will pay more for that. So some of the instruments also, the resonators are brass and they're nickel plated, whereas later they were aluminum. And so if you're getting, you might see a model that's priced higher because it has brass resonators versus the aluminum resonators. And then you get into rarity, some models that are just unique and rare, or they have a specific finish, like maybe a mother of pearl. Like recently I came across a 264 artist special, but it was I think it's from the 30s because it splits in the middle. It's not a one piece, and it has this mother of pearl finish instead of just a stained wood, and that's unique. Like you don't see a lot of those, and so that's another factor that would just price that one up a bit.
Yeah, hearing you talk about all the restoration work reminds me, we were at the Christopher Dean thing, we were all hanging out and someone was talking about getting YouTube certified. There's been some learning and you got YouTube certified on staining wood or nickel plating, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, Shannon, changing gears a bit here, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about your career as a timpanist. So you're the principal timpanist of the St. Louis Symphony. And in thinking back through the podcast episodes, I was thinking about, I know that Cher has a somewhat storied history. The former timpanist was Richard Holmes, and he inspired timpanists, including Jonathan Haas and John Tafoya. So what do you think it was about Mr. Holmes's playing that was so special, and how do you feel about carrying that torch?
It's first of all, it's an honor to sit in his chair. The percussion room or the timpani room still has his name on a little plaque above, and I've left that there just because I feel like it's his room still. But I never personally worked with him. Of course, I grew up listening to his recordings. The St. Louis Symphony under Slacken just probably was one of the most recorded orchestras back then. And I think Holmes was revered as a really strong musician, just a great musical mind. His phrasing, musicianship, his color and his sound. And when I came here, that seemed to be the kind of the legacy, the tone that I heard from people is what a great musician he was, and the kindest soul, just a gentle soul. And so, he inspired a number of timpanists, like two you just mentioned, and also Dave Herbert. I don't know if you know, Dave Herbert worked with him at the conservatory before the conservatory closed down. And then he went to Juilliard to work with Roland Koloff. But yeah, he was a phenomenal player, a great musician.
Yeah, and there's so many of those timpani names, Fred Hanger, Cloyd Duff, like the old time timpanists that are Roland Koloff's another one that they're just like legends, and they just established the sound of timpani in the American orchestra. I remember we had Tim Jennis on, and he was talking about Vic Firth and watching Vic Firth play. And he was like, yeah, like he was using like plastic heads, and like his mallets were just sort of not bad, but nothing Kraft like we have now. And he just sounded amazing the whole time. So
yeah, they set a standard, and then like with anything, you start building on that standard, that base, and making improvements. And I remember hearing when I was in Aspen a summer, and Cloyd Duff came out to do his week class. Cloyd Duff was the timpanist for years at the Cleveland Orchestra and revered. And he said, you're going to go on and do great things and do better things. And that's true, in all industries. You build on what these greats established the foundation of, and you're making improvements with the quality of mallets, instruments, even heads. Plastic heads have come a long way since the 60s and 70s, and technique too. Sound is evolving, and if you if you are willing to evolve with it, even a player who's been in the industry for a while, you're still kind of developing your sound and making sure you're a contender, that you evolve with it.
Well, Shannon, we've had several timpanists on, and I just like concertos in general, but I'm always curious about timpani concertos because there are a few in the repertoire, and a lot of timpanists kind of don't have an interest in playing them. And I get it. They say, I just like how timpani sounds in an orchestra, not on top of it. But I know
Mhm.
you've performed Michael Daugherty's Raise the Roof, as well as the Bill Kraft Second Concerto, which is the one that has the piccolo timpani and a cage around the performer.
Yeah.
So, what is it that you think that why don't a lot of timpanists enjoy playing concerti, and why do you enjoy timpani as a solo instrument?
I actually probably share that same sentiment. I don't necessarily view or hear the timpani as a solo instrument. When you think of solo instruments like the piano or a violin, um, but um, the Raise the Roof came about because I was in the Grand Rapids Symphony at the time, and I was asked to do it, and I listened to it. I wasn't familiar with it. I really did like the opening, the first half. It's kind of there's two halves to that concerto. There's the first half, then there's a cadenza, and then there's the second
And the
half.
first half is way harder.
Yeah, but what I love about it is that it's based on kind of a chant. You know, it's kind of is reminiscent of this Gregorian chant, and so it's very lyrical, and that's what I love about um, if you're going to write for the instrument, try to make it as lyrical as you can. Because what I don't like, and probably what most other timpanists are referring to, is how a lot of the timpani concerti out there are very drummy. No pun intended, but it just sounds like you're just playing these rhythms.
Tom toms, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not that doesn't really interest me. I want to play musical lines, and when you think about some of the great moments in timpani repertoire, whether it's Strauss, burlesque, or even Stravinsky, the way they write for the timpani are these very short but like melodic motifs. Um, Beethoven, wrote and utilized timpani more like a third trumpet, and so even though it's not as lyrical, um, it's still fun in a different way because it's more rhythmic, but it's also like harmonically rhythmic, and I feel like I'm part of the trumpet section. Um, until Beethoven 9, Beethoven 9 has a dun dun dun, so it is kind of more this melodic motif there where he's branching into that, and so I really love the first half of the Daugherty. The cadenza is challenging, but also melodic. I don't love the second half that much because it gets a little bit more what I refer to as gimmicky, where you're putting a cymbal on the drum and then using maracas and slapstick, and it's a little bit more rhythmic. But then at the very end, it does get a little bit more melodic again. But with the Kraft was just all about lines, lyrical lines. And part of that is because you have so many different notes available to you. You've got 9 tenor timpani surrounding you, and then down on the floor, you've got 6. And you're pedaling a lot too, so you're creating even more line by more notes being available to you. And it never really gets gimmicky at all. It's just he's writing, Bill is writing musical lines and lyrical lines, and a lot of like 9, 11, 13 chords. So you're getting a lot of that kind of jazz influence. And that's really what appealed to me with that concerto, is that I felt like I was going to be able to make some musical lyrical statements.
I'm assuming the thing that did not appeal to you was having to procure all the tenor timpani.
Yeah, so that happened right after we had our second child. And so our second, Wilhelmina, was born in December, and I was playing that in April. So I knew, and we already had our firstborn, so I knew it was going to be a tough year. So Dave Herbert is the one who is a person who owns these tenor timpani. San Francisco Symphony commissioned Bill Kraft, and then David. At the time, he and Trey Wyatt were owned California Percussion, and I think California Percussion bought the sets, or at least one of the sets. And Marshall Light was commissioned to make these drums. And when the company split and Dave was no longer a part of it, I believe he bought both sets. And so he has them both now. And so he'll rent them out. And so I got in contact with Dave, and I told him we were going to do this, and how soon in advance can I get these? And he kind of briefed me on what he expected it would take to learn and memorize it, and then I doubled that time frame because I knew with a newborn and how busy it was going to be, that I needed to like have the drums ready in advance. So I had them about a year in advance, and I set it up in my studio and got used to the setup, and that alone was a new challenge because you're moving your body in different ways. You've got drums at different angles, and it'd be like adding valves to a trumpet or adding strings to a string instrument and suddenly having to, relearn your instrument. And I don't stand when I play, and of course for this you have to stand. And there's no way you could read the music because the space that envelops you is huge, and you can't have your eyes glued to small print. So it required memorizing, and so I took a full year and just worked on it, as much as I could every day without being an absentee father, and knowing that I still had a job to uphold, and Mallet Shop, and other aspects of my life. So, but it was gratifying, and I'd love to do it again one day. I just don't know if that'll happen.
Logistically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we had Dave Herbert on the podcast, we asked him about the same piece, and like that piece, I mean, it's obviously like it's his baby, and it was like it was nice to hear him say in so many words. He said, like, if anyone's interested in performing this piece, like I want it to get performed, like let me know. We'll figure the timpani thing out. Like he seemed very open to the idea of like other people playing it and using those drums.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then real quick about Raise the Roof, that the I guess the second section that the timpani plays, like my take on it was like it's like your Jimmy Page up there. It's just rock and roll. I think that's a fun one.
It also kind of mimics Bernstein a little bit, like West Side Story when you get the maracas. So you kind of fall into this pattern and this groove, and then you're just it's a little more orchestral in a sense, which you could say is an aspect of the instrument, but
yeah. Well, I was talking about this I guess the second minor section, like after the plain chant, where you kind of bum beeble
right,
that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the maraca mallets, I just remember I was like, all right, I'm not buying extras. I'm gonna drop $90 on one pair, and if they break before the performance, I just don't use them.
Yeah, I ended up using the Frere maraca mallets for that because they had a lot of sound, but also, they were easy and fluid in my hands.
Yeah. Yeah, those they don't rebound the same way a regular timpani mallet does, which you kind of need in that section.
Yeah. He redesigned them, and they have a lot more maraca sound, and I like the redesign of them much more than the first version of them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I used the JG ones. I think John Tafoya has some as well.
John had some too. I have those. Yeah, I got a pair of his like before anybody was making them, like back when I replaced him in Florida Philharmonic. And those are cool too. They split on me, because they were just kind of what he came up with at the time.
Well, speaking of the Florida Philharmonic, that brings us to our next question, which is that you won a timpani position with the Florida Philharmonic early in your career. And then I'm assuming not long after that, this orchestra dissolved under some pretty unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah.
And we've heard from several musicians, or I have heard from several musicians in that orchestra about how it affected them and their lives. I heard Keith Aleo talk about it, and Keith had a really sort of beautiful outlook that he had this huge career goal to win an orchestra job, and he did at a very young age. And then when that just fell out from under him, he had to pick up the pieces and figure out what's next. How do I move on from here? So,
Hmm.
what sort of life lessons did you learn from that unfortunate experience?
Yeah. I think my dad was a good example to me. My dad was in a really bad car accident in the 80s, and it put him in the hospital for about 6 months. And seeing how he persevered throughout that and dealt with change and how it affected him physically, but also just carry on and follow what he loved. That was a big life lesson for me. So when Florida Philharmonic folded, it was 4 years after I won the job, and it was the second time they folded. It was stunning. It's difficult enough to win an orchestral job, and then to watch it fall apart in front of you is difficult, because it's just, you can't just turn around and audition and win a job like the next day. It's difficult.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about this the other day, and it was like this guy and his wife had moved somewhere, or something like that, and it's the non-musicians like, oh well, can you just call the symphony and see if they're hiring? Like, do they need a timpanist? Like, no, that's not.
Yeah,
It's not exactly how this works.
right. Yeah,
You think they can make room for an extra? Or, yeah.
yeah, the process. And so I had just bought a house too. So there I am moving into my house like a couple months after the orchestra folded, and I remember just looking around, and I was single at the time, and I was just like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? Like, I didn't feel like I really had a purpose there anymore. Shortly after that, I got a call from Nay Rosario, who was the head of the department at University of Miami, and he had asked if I was interested in joining the faculty, but you're an adjunct lecturer is what you are, and teaching the orchestral. And that was because Keith Aleo left and went to Zildjian. And so, it wasn't an aspiration of mine, but it was something that gave me some purpose to stay in Florida. And one positive about Florida is that there are a lot of different orchestras. They're smaller orchestras, but there's a lot of work there. So if you don't mind, hitting the trails and driving around, there's a lot of work.
A lot of pops gigs, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff. Palm Beach Pops. There's Naples Philharmonic. There was Boca Symphonia, which kind of came out of the ruins of Florida Phil. There was Miami Symphony. Yeah, there are a few others that I'm probably missing the names. Southwest Symphony and Florida Symphony, and there are contractors contracting stuff. So there's a lot of work, and of course I had Mallet Shop still. So I was really busy, but I was just always like up and out the door, and just gone all day. And so I felt like I had a purpose, but I also felt like I was chasing the dollar. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to a gig and playing that gig, I'm getting my paycheck, but I'm not necessarily developing my sound or working on a degree of artistry or with the same group of people day in and day out. And so I really wanted that, and I still had a love and passion for playing. Keith had already been in the orchestra for years, so I think for him, a career change was more interesting to him, and he did that. And he loves teaching. He always taught, and he's such a people person. So going to Zildjian in that position was great for him. But I still wanted to play, and so I just started practicing again, and taking auditions. And I was fortunate that eventually I landed a job again, and that was Grand Rapids Symphony. And even though it was a smaller orchestra, I was happy to kind of put all the gigging aside and even the teaching, and I wanted to be on stage with one group developing my sound, working, going through repertoire, and just kind of having one place to do it. So, I kind of closed the chapter on Florida and moved up to Michigan, where I'm originally from, but I was on the West Coast instead of the East Coast where I grew up, and it was great. It was great for me. I think without that, I may not be where I am right now, and because it just allowed me to keep building on what I wanted to build on.
Well, it sounds like not too much has really changed in the South Florida landscape since when you were there. I lived down there from 2011 up until last summer, 2021, and after school was doing the freelance. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing for building a freelance career because there's a ton of part-time orchestras, and many of them are playing at a very high level, professional level. But yeah, you do feel like you're lacking the consistency of playing with the same section all the time, because it's one day you're here, the next day you're here, and it's hard to develop, like you said, develop your sound and really I think feel like you have the level of artistry that you want. But I'll bring it. We mentioned Keith Aleo. Of course, it's hard to talk about the Florida Philharmonic without mentioning him. And he was one of my teachers in Boston. And every time, I'd come in for a lesson and just be like super stressed, or like, I got to learn this by this date. How am I going to make it happen? Or I got this audition. And he would always say, every challenge is a gift. And it sounds like in this situation, I know a lot of the musicians who were in the Philharmonic, the ones that stayed. And they're, the Boca Sinfonia came out of that, Orchestra Miami. There's so many symphony, and people just kind of had to pick up the pieces and create some beautiful things after that. Plus people like yourself who went on to, have other successful auditions and meaningful work.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Every challenge, what was it? Every challenge is a
gift.
Yeah, it's a gift. You that's how you improve, whether it's self-improvement or a relationship. When there's friction in a relationship, it forces you to look at yourself or look at the other person and have some kind of self-growth. And all these challenges in life hopefully make us better people, better individuals. And so, yeah, you learn to persevere. You also learn that nothing lasts forever, and it kind of makes you appreciate everything you have when you go through something like that.
I'm just sitting here kind of giggling because at this concert I played on Saturday, they were having some technical difficulties with the projector and the video beforehand, and the IT person that was there couldn't figure it out. So finally, Mark Ford went to the dean, who was sitting there watching this all, and he said, Dean Richmond, we need someone to come help solve this. So the dean gets on the phone and he tells someone, we have an opportunity to problem solve in the recital hall right now. And afterward, after he hung up, he said, we have an opportunity to have a meeting on Monday to sort this out. So always an opportunity. Good outlook on it.
It's a great way. Yeah, it's a great way to live.
Well, Shannon, anything else that we should mention before we wrap up here?
What I was just down in New World coaching, and there were three of the fellows were leaving. It was their last year, and there was concern, like, what am I going to do? They hadn't landed their job yet, and I had a conversation with one of them, and this is just for everybody. Is that we're products of a fast food nation, and so we want everything immediately. We want it quick. You see different friends in different industries and careers getting jobs right out of college, or maybe not so much recently. But every audition you take, every job you do, whether it's the one you necessarily have dreamt of or not, or the one you really want, they're all stepping stones. And it's hard. It's maybe a little cliche to hear that, but it's really true. it's been that way for me, and I see other players that have, paid their dues and been through, battles and trials, and it's been that way for them. Some people are lucky and land something really quick, but all the work you do is getting you closer and closer to that place you end up. And I think perseverance is key, and not to give up and not to be discouraged, but just keep working towards what you want. And sometimes what you want changes, and that's okay. But just keep working towards something, and you'll find your way and you'll find your place.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, Shannon, thanks so much for your generous time today. It's been a blast getting to chat again. And thank you, Karli. And we will see everyone on episode 324.